Hello viewers and welcome to yet another commentated Octagon match of Warhammer 40,000 Conquest. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today we have a match between Ranlam playing as the Chaos Warlord Zarathur High Sorcerer and Paul Steiner running the Astra Militarum Warlord Torquemada Coteaz. In taking a look at our initial layout of planets, planet number 1 is going to be Yvonne, which puts units into play into player's HQ. Planet number 2 is going to be Karnath, which triggers the battle ability of any other planet. Planet number 3 is going to be Atrox Prime, which deals damage to adjacent planets or a target player's HQ. Planet 4 is going to be Taurus, which happens to reward players for keeping their unit count low, and planet number 5 is going to be Planum, which allows the movement of non-warlord units. So in taking a look at our deploy actions, we can see the initiative token happens to be in the possession of Paul Steiner, and his very first action happens to be putting the Glavoden Eagle into play. So already Torquemada Coteaz ends up having 1 attack value, and at any point during combat he can detach his attachment in order to create a 1 attack, 1 hit point army unit that can subsequently be used during the next turn's deploy phase to bounce back to his hand, buy him a little bit of a delay. But we end up seeing a promise of glory from our Chaos player that's going to generate 2 cultist tokens that can of course be sacrificed in order to decrease the cost of demon units. So we end up seeing a Catachan Outpost played by Paul Steiner. This is going to afford him an excellent opportunity to augment Torquemada Coteaz or any other Astra Militarum units, just because Coteaz's normal drawback is having 0 printed attack value unless he can actually sacrifice a unit. So just a couple fantastic means for him to circumvent that typical drawback. We end up seeing a copy of Chaos Fanatics, our first army unit, put into play at planet number 4. That's going to potentially reward a card and resource to our Chaos player, and just as our players are starting to continue deploying cards, as they're slowly starting to whittle away their resources, we end up seeing a copy of the Iron Guard Recruits, also played out to planet number 4 by Paul. So just in assessing our players' hands, we've got a Slaanesha's Temptation and Tzeentch's Firestorm for Ranlam, a couple 2-shield cards, we've got a copy of Bad Doc for Command, Gleeful Plague Beast to deal out a bunch of damage to those relatively weak Astra Militarum units, and then a Rotten Plague Bearers, a little bit of Command, a little bit of pre-ranged phase, combat phase sniping, which could be absolutely crucial. For Paul, we end up seeing a copy of the Interrogator Acolyte, which can allow him to draw additional cards. Elysian Assault Team is going to replace any warriors or soldiers that leave play. And then Snakebite Thug is just a really hard-hitting unit, and of course 2 arms can allow for the double use of this Catachan Outpost here. So for our Chaos player, we do end up seeing that copy of Rotten Plague Bearers put out to planet number 2. That's going to allow him to potentially win command there, potentially kill off any weak enemy unit during the command phase, and in assessing our victory condition, it looks as though we could very well see a very early game victory indeed. Through technology or material icons, we could have a player win as early as planet number 3. So the Interrogator Acolyte, played out by Paul, ends up at planet number 1, and that leaves Paul with 0 resources and 4 cards in hand. So Ranlam still has 3 resources, 4 cards, and let's see what exactly, if anything else, our Chaos player is going to be doing. So Yvonne, Karnath, all of these planets are definitely going to be, points of contest really early on. We end up seeing both of those cultists sacrificed for a Gleeful Plague Beast out to planet number 1, and that's going to definitely put quite a bit of pressure on Paul to either give up that planet or try to respond. And seeing as how Yvonne happens to have a single planet type icon of each kind, that's going to be absolutely critical in just helping either of these players win very early. So we're about to go into command. Paul indicates that he has passed during his deploy action. There's absolutely nothing else that our Chaos player is going to be able to do. There's no target for his Rotten Plague Bears, so he has to be out of actions. And in regard to where exactly we'd like to see our Warlord sent, I could see Zarathur potentially going to planet number 2 just to trigger some sort of battle ability like Taurus. I could also see him going maybe Probably not to Taurus. I guess the trick here is Zarathur is by himself so completely fragile compared to Coteaz, who could attack for 1. He could be augmented by the Catachan outpost up to 3, and if he chooses to discard his Eagle, that could potentially be a swing for 6, which is almost enough to bloody Zarathur in a single blow, despite our Chaos player having some shield cards here. So where exactly are we going to see these players? We end up seeing Paul go to planet number 1, and we see Zarathur go to Atrox Prime, so there's going to be quite a bit of command struggle victory for our Chaos player, a little bit less for Paul, but let's end up seeing how everything goes. So our Chaos player is going to get a grand total of 3 cards and 3 resources relative to Paul's quite paltry single resource, but so long as he can be as aggressive as possible, he could end up pulling this out. So he's going to have initiative at the very first planet. He's going to be able to swing with this Interrogator Acolyte, wound that Gleeful Plague Beast, end up taking a little bit of damage in return, sack that Interrogator Acolyte, and quite likely deal the killing blow to this Gleeful Plague Beast, and that's going to be quite a bit of a resource setback for our Chaos player. And if Paul can manage to keep that extremely aggressive gameplay up, he could do very, very well indeed. But in regard to command struggles, we ended up seeing Zarathur's Flamers and a copy of Promotion drawn for Zarathur, and a copy of well, it looks like Paul didn't actually draw any cards. So 1 damage to each of Paul's units and 1 damage to the Gleeful Plague Beast at the onset of the combat phase due to that forced reaction. We end up seeing the Interrogator Acolyte immediately discarded, and Paul ends up drawing 2 different cards. So kind of a curious thing here. I suppose the Interrogator Acolyte did not actually attack, but we do see Paul draw 2 cards. He gets Coteaz's Henchman and a Preemptive Barrage. Paul calls out to see if there's any action on part of our Chaos player. We've got that Tzeentch's Firestorm, which was perhaps what Paul was afraid of, and we end up seeing the Catachan outpost, of course, augment Coteaz up to a grand total of 6 attack. He takes a swing, and we are guaranteed to see a kill for that Gleeful Plague Beast, so that is pretty devastating attack. We don't see a 3 shield card, so there's absolutely nothing that our Chaos player can do to prevent that. So it looks like Paul, in not attacking with the Acolyte, was probably trying to hedge his bets just to make sure that no Chaos event ended up killing off that unit. So definitely not a bad play there. So the Gleeful Plague Beast is killed, and it does not get a chance to wound Coteaz, which is going to be so incredibly important, despite his 8 hit points, just because, once again, we're going to see that hyper-aggressive playstyle. So is Yvarn going to be triggered? Let's see. I can't imagine that he would, and I'm going to just assume he does not. So Coteaz bounces back to the HQ, and Paul manages to capture Yvarn. So he's got 1 technology, 1 material, 1 strong point icon. There is going to be a combat taking place at Atrox Prime. Are we going to see it fire into the headquarters, or are we going to see it fire at the Iron Guard recruits? So let's see here. Paul has decided, at least not yet, to detach the Glavoden Eagle, so he must not be too terribly concerned about any kind of benefit from deploy stall in being able to use that as an action to bounce it back to his hand, buy himself a free deploy action. Zarathur ends up triggering Atrox Prime targeted to Taurus, so the Iron Guard recruits take 1 point of damage as opposed to simply allowing Coteaz to take another point of damage, and I can only presume that eventually we'll see some sort of like single point of damage deal the killing blow to that Iron Guard recruits. But both players ready all their cards. They generate 4 resource tokens, and they draw 2 cards. We end up seeing Ranlam draw another copy of Gleeful Plague Beast and a Khorne Berserker. He's presently got 6 resources left in hand, whereas Paul ended up getting a copy of the Seraphim Superior Allegra and Coteaz's Henchman. So this Seraphim is very, very handy, seeing as as how we've already got a Catachan Outpost in play. We also happen to have a 2 arms in Paul's hand. We also happen to see a preemptive barrage in Coteaz's Henchman, which is absolutely fantastic. So altogether, any of these pieces could just be absolutely tremendous in allowing Paul to deal out a tremendous amount of damage during the ranged phase to just obliterate Zarathur. And seeing as how the victory condition for Paul is just a mere couple planets away, that could just be so incredibly nasty here. So the Coteaz's henchmen are soldiers. The Elysian assault team that he has 2 copies of are also soldiers, or rather they can come into play when soldiers leave play. So we see a copy of Slaaneish's Temptation quite wisely played out to the 5th planet. It's not a tremendously high value planet in just being able to steal 1 resource, and that's really going to punish Paul if he continues deploying units far up front the table here. So I'm curious as to what exactly our Chaos player is going to be playing in order to try to contest our Astra Militarum Warlord, but we do see a copy of Coteaz's Henchman touch down on Karnath. The problem, of course, being that unless Zarathur comes to Karnath, they're only going to be able to exhaust for a single point of damage, and that's not going to be nearly enough to overcome the might of Coteaz here. So if Zarathur risks it, he's going to... if Zarathur risks going to the first planet, he's definitely likely to get preemptive barraged into absolute oblivion unless his single 2-icon shield here can hold up. We end up seeing a promotion put out to planet number 3, affixed to the Chaos Fanatics, which is going to allow our Chaos player to win command over Taurus here. And it looks like that is pretty much that. Paul has passed. Our Chaos player still has 4 resources with which to use actions. That Slaaneish's Temptation has already punished Paul in boosting the resource investment of that Coteaz's Henchman up to 3. But what exactly are we going to see from ranlam? Are we going to see something along the lines of a Zarathur's Flamers for 2? He's definitely got to be a little bit nervous here. We do see a copy of Khorne Berserker. I rightly assumed it was going to go to planet number 1, and the trick here is Paul's going to want to be able to kill this in a single swing, just because that 2/4 unit happens to have that brutal keyword, and Paul is going to want to avoid damage going on to Coteaz at... if at all possible here, but let's see how things break down. I can only assume that Paul is going to go to planet number 1. Zarathur may well end up going to Atrox Prime once again, just to play it a little bit safe, perhaps to trigger Taurus, or not trigger Taurus, trigger Atrox Prime to blast Taurus once again, potentially killing off these Iron Guard recruits. I don't think it's very likely that he would go to Planum, but it's possible. I just think both of these Chaos units are going to end up being killed here. But what are we going to see? So both players are presently picking their Warlord destination. All right, it looks as though both players have picked, and what exactly are we going to see? I'm guessing Coteaz 1 and Zarathur perhaps 2, perhaps 1, just because Zarathur is going to need to be aggressive, whether he feels like he can be or not, just to try to prevent Coteaz from just obliterating him. But that could definitely backfire on Zarathur, so Paul is going to go to planet number 1. It looks as though ranlam ends up also going to planet number 1, so he's decided to be a little bit ballsy. Those Rotten Plague Bearers are going to have an opportunity to shoot for 2. It looks like they can deal damage to any target unit. So is it going to be Coteaz? I can't imagine it'll be the henchmen because they're going to be sacrificed. So it looks like Coteaz is going to take a couple points of damage. But in regard to economic victory, once again, Paul does very poorly in just allowing his opponent to play the economic game. So it's going to be 2 cards, 2 resources for our Chaos player. And once again, just in assessing Paul's hand, he's got 2 copies of the Elysian Assault Team. He's got 2 arms. He's got Preemptive Barrage. And between all of those different effects, Zarathur is going to be taking quite a lot of damage indeed. So I'm predicting we will likely see Zarathur bloodied this turn, or perhaps Paul will simply opt to kill off this copy of the Khorne Berserker. But let's see what exactly happens here. In regard to cards drawn, we see a promotion and ammo depot for Zarathur. It looks as though combat is about to start. The Khorne Berserker exhausts, and I'm not exactly sure what is going on here. So the initiative token does happen to be in Paul's hand. Looks like maybe there was a little bit of confusion. Alright, so Paul indicates that he indeed has actions, so just a small mistake there, but I can only imagine that we'll end up seeing this copy of Preemptive Barrage. Are we going to see the Rotten Plaguebearers fire? And I suppose my being a spectator in this game, but as a player, has caused some sort of problem with the initiative token, so it did not automatically change hands for our players here, so it's actually going to be Zarathur acting first in this first battle. We do end up seeing this copy of Preemptive Barrage played out, so both Torquemada Coteaz and the Coteaz Henchmen are going to be acting during the range skirmish round. So at present, Torquemada happens to have an attack value of 1, but let's see, the Henchmen are going to have an opportunity to take a swing for 1 point of damage. Alright, so the Khorne Berserker is ready. We are about to begin our ranged skirmish round, and what are Paul's targets going to be? He asks our Chaos player if he happens to have any actions, so we've got this Tzeentch's Firestorm, and in his hand, he could well use the Rotten Plaguebearers, he could use the Tzeentch's Firestorm to try to kill off the Coteaz Henchmen, but we could also see the Glavoden Eagle detached in order to become an army unit here, so I suppose it's possible that Preemptive Barrage likely could have targeted the Glavoden Eagle, but I imagine we just want to make sure we see as much attack value as possible, all affixed to Coteaz, and then that Eagle can still have an opportunity to attack once, you know, it's clear and all the Chaos units have attacked. So it looks as though Tzeentch's Firestorm was played for 3 resources, so what exactly does Paul have for shields? He's got that 2 arms, which is a little bit of a shame, but it looks as though he's going to essentially be forced to use that if he wants to spare its life. It's going to be dropped down to just, well, 2 remaining hit points, but then the Rotten Plaguebearers is going to be able to potentially finish it off. So Torquemada might just take this opportunity to try to bloody Zarathur, but I don't know if he's going to be able to conjure up the damage. We could see these Elysian assault teams interplay, and then Paul could sacrifice them. So there's certainly plenty of interesting things that could happen, but what exactly can we expect? In regard to potentially bloodying Zarathur, there's only this 1 shield icon value promotion sitting in our Chaos player's hand, so it's all going to come down to Paul's Astra Militarum tricks. Alright, so it looks as though Paul has allowed that Coteaz's henchman to be destroyed, and he ends up using that triggering effect to put an Elysian assault team into play, and it seems as though he is immediately going to be using his opportunity to do a combat action to boost Coteaz up to a base attack value of 4, once again during the ranged skirmish round. So note that he still has 1 Elysian assault team in reserve. He's going to be potentially attacking for 4, boosted to 6, and if he uses 2 arms, it's going to be boosted to 8. So if he chooses to accept it, this is his opportunity to bloody Zarathur. He'll have to invest everything he has in this attack. He'll likely end up giving up the planets, but he could definitely deal out some just enormous amounts of damage here. So what are we going to see? We end up seeing Coteaz targeted by the Catachan outpost. So it looks like just a small mistake there for ranlam, who's must be quite eager to retreat from the planet. We do end up seeing that copy of 2 arms, so the Catachan outpost is going to be readied, so Coteaz goes from 4 attack value to 6 to a grand total of 8. So it's going to be an enormous swing of 8 to Zarathur, so Zarathur does not have the opportunity to retreat. He instead has the opportunity to be bloodied. Of course, all we see is this copy of promotion in regard to shield icons that's going to be dropping Zarathur to still taking 7 points of damage. so unless he would have had his signature attachment, the Mark of Chaos, there was absolutely nothing that Paul could do to prevent that. And seeing as how we've only seen 13 cards of Zarathur's deck, he was not so fortunate as to have drawn that card. So Zarathur just lost a ton of his potency, and having 5 mere hit points, given the preemptive barrage preferring Torquemada Coteaz here, Zarathur is looking in a very rough spot indeed. But now it's going to come down to, is there anything Paul can do to try to win this planet? Coteaz is only attacking for 1 by himself. The Eagle is only attacking for 1. He could potentially kill off the Rotten Plague Bearers here, but he would be taking quite a bit of damage for Coteaz. And then it's all going to come down to Zarathur no longer augmenting any of these units, any of these damaging effects. It's just going to be a mountain of damage. And actually, speaking of Zarathur's damage augmentation, it may have been a little bit of overkill to play that Tzeentch's Firestorm for 3 resources, just because that itself was being augmented by Zarathur being present at that planet. So 4 damage, probably overkill. But, you know, I suppose it actually was overkill. So 1 wasted resource, essentially. But that Khorne Berserker ends up taking a swing, puts another couple points of damage onto Coteaz, and the Rotten Plague Bearers are going to be able to use their action to put an additional point of damage onto Coteaz. So he's got 4 hit points remaining. Is he going to press the attack? I cannot imagine that he will, but let's see. What do we see from Paul? Do we see a retreat at the end of the round? It seems as though we quite wisely do end up seeing that retreat. So we don't see the Eagle detached. We don't end up seeing any further attacks from Coteaz. So it seems as though my presence in the game is once again causing the Octagon automation to malfunction somewhat. And I take a moment to remind our players that they're likely going to have to capture Karrnath automatically. But Zarathur ends up triggering, it seems as though, Ossus 4. So he's going to steal 1 resource from Paul Steiner, and that's going to drop both players down to just a token amount of resources, pardon the pun there. Paul is going to have 0, and ranlam is going to have 1. So Zarathur is going to have very little indeed, but we have no additional combats taking place, and that is essentially going to be the round. So as we go into headquarters and both players are going to be generating their standard 4 resources and drawing 2 cards, we can still see quite a few nasty units that Paul has access to, but due to the Slaanesha's Temptation here, he's not going to be able to play Seraphim Superior Allegra, and either of his other remaining units are going to cost almost all of the resources that he has. So I'm sorry, it looks as though ranlam has been experiencing a little bit of lag. Instead of triggering on Ossus 4, he's actually going to be triggering Atrox Prime with Karrnath, and Atrox Prime is going to be firing at Taurus, so the Iron Guard recruits are killed, and now, if Paul would like to do so, he will be able to play his Seraphim Superior Allegra, and considering that it can attack, that it can ready the Catachan Outpost, that's just incredibly nasty for Paul there. So I'm very curious to see how exactly that's going to pay in dividends for Paul. And of course, it seems as though ranlam ended up gaining 1 material, 1 technology icon, so we could still see the game won by Paul as early as Taurus if he wins the next couple planets, and then the same thing goes for Zarathur. If he manages to press the attack, he could very well win this one. We end up seeing a copy of Orc Cannon and Promise of Glory drawn for Zarathur, so a little bit of economy, a little bit of Orc Cannon, allowing some damage to be splashed onto units, but it loses so much of its efficiency once Zarathur is no longer on the board here. So we have some nice options for Paul now. He could do an Evil Sun's Warbiker and a Shoot 'em Mob, or he could opt to play a single copy of the Seraphim Superior Allegra. And of course, as soon as he happens to stumble across another copy of Preemptive Barrage, or a Rattling Deadeye, or anything along those lines, Zarathur is going to be in a very rough spot indeed, particularly if Paul is running the likes of Staging Ground in his deck. Then he can basically pinpoint wherever Zarathur goes, augment that rattling, and just blast him to oblivion. But our initiative token is once again correctly in Paul's hands now, and what are we going to be seeing from Paul? We end up seeing a copy of Shoot 'em Mob put into play by Paul. It's going to take him 2 resources to do it, but he ends up putting that unit to planet number 1, and again, consider that the initiative token happens to be in Paul's possession. If Zarathur goes to planet number 1, these rotten plague bears are going to be arriving exhausted, so they can't tap to kill off that Shoot 'em Mob prior to its opportunity to attack, so it's going to be able to swing, whether or not it's augmented by the Catachan outpost that should be ready, and of course, Coteaz himself should be ready, and then the Shoot 'em Mob is going to be able to swing, potentially deal out some damage, whether it's augmented or not, and then of course Coteaz himself can sacrifice the Shoot 'em Mob in order to hit like a freight train just himself. So I definitely think we could see the Shoot 'em Mob potentially kill the Rotten Plague Bearers. A Catachan Outpost modified Coteaz could handily kill the Khorne Berserker unless our Chaos player were happening to hold his 3 shield icon card, so if Zarathur ends up going to the first planet, that's really going to end up punishing him. But what exactly are we going to see? I suppose it's possible that we could see Coteaz end up going to Taurus because his unit count is so low, but I definitely think he's going to try to press his advantage here. So we see a copy of the Snakebite Thug. It's going to take the remainder of Paul's resources, and that ends up going out to planet number 1 as well. But looks like we've got a pretty daunting combat presence sitting here at planet number 1. It's now Zarathur's turn to deploy, and what are we going to see? So no events whatsoever in Paul's hands, and now it's all going to come down to our Chaos player. So he's got 4 resources, and he's got the equivalent of 2 resources with which to put a demon into play, so we could see this copy of Gleeful Plague Beast. It would quite handily kill off this Shoot 'em Mob unless Paul ends up drawing some resources, but then this Snakebite Thug is definitely nowhere close to being destroyed outright by a Gleeful Plague Beast. So what exactly are we going to see? Are we going to end up seeing our Chaos player just try to continue winning command? I suppose we didn't happen to mention that Iridial is our new planet number 5. That's going to allow a player to remove all damage from a unit. Coteaz could certainly benefit from that, but he doesn't necessarily need to, just so long as he can keep dealing out damage. He definitely doesn't want to be bloodied, but I feel like he's still feeling relatively safe. Orc Cannon ends up entering play. Paul indicates that he has passed, and once again, it's all going to come down to our Chaos player. So I see those cultist tokens disappear. I can only imagine that's going to be our Gleeful Plague Beast, not the Zarathur's Flamers. So we end up seeing the Plague Beast put out to planet number 1. That's indefinitely in jeopardy of costing Paul his Shoot 'em Mob here. The Snakebite Thug will be wounded. Coteaz himself will be wounded. But will we see Coteaz go to planet number 1? Does he feel comfortable trying to win it with just these 2 units? Certainly both players, whomever ends up winning these next couple planets could win the game. So will we see Zarathur go to planet number 1? Will we see Coteaz touch down on planet number 1? He definitely kind of has to continue being aggressive. He ends up going to planet number 4. Very interesting choice from Paul. I suppose he's taking a little bit of a risk in just allowing our Chaos player to have won so much command. He's definitely wanting to get rid of that Slaanesha's Temptation, and now it's going to come down to, is Paul going to potentially win a shield card with which to save this Shoot 'em Mob? That's going to make a ton of difference if he can basically ignore the initial attack. He was not so fortunate as to draw a shield card, and of course our Chaos player ends up getting 2 cards and 2 resources, so 3 resources, 1 card in total for Paul. Our Chaos player got another copy of the Slaanesha's Temptation. Looks like that Shoot 'em Mob is going to be killed at the onset of the combat phase. There are no events, no shields in Paul's hand, but he does happen to have a copy of the Elysian Assault Team, which he does not put into play yet, so it's looking as though things are pretty good for him to potentially be able to win this first planet. But that Gleeful Plague Beast, he's got some significant shielding ability in his hand here, so we could see a total of 3 damage shaved off of this. Ranlam indicates that he indeed does have an action, and what are we going to see? We see the Orc Cannon trigger, and it's going to be putting a point of damage on that Snakebite Thug, which is essentially not going to make any difference over the course of the game. So the Snakebite Thug, of course, takes that 1 indirect damage, no opportunity to shield. Paul is going to be able to attack in return, and we end up seeing a copy of Promotion Temptation discarded in order to prevent the point of damage to that Gleeful Plague Beast. So that was actually working against ranlam had he known that Paul doesn't have any shields here, just because that's essentially just another additional point of damage onto the Gleeful Plague Beast. The Snakebite Thug is in no jeopardy of itself being killed. We see an attack of 3 go out to that Gleeful Plague Beast, and what exactly is going to happen with this attack? It looks as though Paul chose not to make use of his Catachan Outpost. We do see that 2 shield icon card played, so it's only going to be 1 point of damage going on to that Gleeful Plague Beast, but it seems as though Paul is very narrowly going to be able to eke out that win with this Elysian Assault team modified by the Catachan Outpost here. So the Snakebite Thug ends up dealing itself a point of damage. It had 1 hit point remaining. The Gleeful Plague Beast attacks for 3. It, of course, kills it. Now the Elysian Assault team is going to interplay. Paul, I can only imagine, is going to activate the outpost to boost it up to 4. He will in turn swing. He will kill the Gleeful Plague Beast. He'll be able to win Atrox Prime and deal a little bit of damage to these Chaos Fanatics here. So definitely a very narrow margin of victory here, but now Paul is going to be potentially very well set up to go to Taurus during the following turn if he can manage to scrounge together enough units to pose like a big daunting presence there. So it's going to be very handy, very nice that Paul is going to be able to steal a resource. He's going to be able to get rid of this Slaaneish's Temptation. So that's going to mean Atrox Prime won by Paul. It's going to be another material, another technology icon, and this Chaos Fanatics is going to take 1 point of damage, which is helpful throughout the course of battle, and the Elysian Assault team is going to be bouncing into Paul's HQ exhausted and having served the Imperium very well this day. So for Planum, I can only imagine that we'll see the Khorne Berserker shifting over to Taurus, and unfortunately the Rotten Plague Bears is going to be basically just sitting there, only winning command for Zarathur. So Zarathur during this potentially final round of the game isn't really safe anywhere. Like if Paul were to get, say, a Rattling Deadeye, and he's got this staging ground, if he gets any sort of 2 arms or another Catachan Outpost, that could just go all the way bad for killing Zarathur. But what are we going to see? Is Paul going to press his luck next turn in trying to win at Taurus and seal the game? So let's see what to expect. But we do see Paul steal 1 resource as we go into the headquarters phase, and each player ends up generating 2 additional cards and 4 resource tokens. That's going to mean 5 resources, 6 cards for our Chaos player, and in turn, 8 resources, 6 cards for Paul. So Slaaneish's Temptation has been discarded, and now it's all going to be up to this last HQ phase. What is Paul going to get that's useful? What is ranlam potentially going to get that's useful? If ranlam manages to win Taurus, he could still win the game through Planum if he manages to block Paul there. So with a bit of glitchy octagon functionality, we are able to make it past the headquarters phase, and we can see that we have a copy of Orc Cannon and Rotten Plague Bearers by our Chaos player, drawn by him, and we see a very important copy of 2 Arms and a Talarn Raiders drawn by Paul. So it's going to be very important that he gets a lot of inexpensive units to put into play. So he's got 8 resources. That's definitely enough to do something along the lines of a Coteaz's Henchman and or Evil Sun's Warbiker or a Talarn Raiders, and so long as these units are sitting there in play and Coteaz remains in play, it could just provide a fantastic opportunity for Coteaz to just pummel and obliterate our Chaos Warlord here. So in regard to cards that could help ranlam, he ended up putting a copy of Rogue Trader out to planet number 3, so he's likely to be generating 3 resources just by the merit of that unit sitting there. Paul ends up putting a copy of Staging Ground into play, so he can dump out this Evil Sun's Warbiker entirely unmolested until it's time to attack by Chaos. We end up seeing a copy of the Orc Cannon enter the HQ of Zarathur, once again not nearly as effective without without the damage augmentation Zarathur normally affords. and just, man, a glut of just fantastic cards in Paul's hand here. So he's got a 2 arms to do like a double duty from Catachan Outpost. Looks like Ranlam is bemoaning not having Squig Bombing in his deck. Very clutch card from time to time, playing against the Astra Militarum, especially considering 2 arms and Seraphim Superior Allegra, because between these two effects with Catachan Outpost, even though the initiative token happens to be in the possession of our Chaos player, there is a lot of work that can be done here. So the Seraphim could be, we could have our Chaos player attack for 2, then the Seraphim is augmented to an attack value of 5. Thanks to the Catachan Outpost, it attacks and then it readies the outpost. It's just so much nasty stuff that we could see, but definitely I think we're going to see a very strong economic victory once again for our Chaos player. But are we going to see a Warp Storm drawn? Are we going to see like a Nurgling Bomb? Is there anything that Ranlam happens to have in his deck that could help him eke out a victory here? Just because it's going to be very, very difficult going up against this 2-attack Talarn Raiders, this 4-attack Evil Sun's Warbiker. So what are we going to see? We end up seeing Paul put out a copy of that Seraphim Superior Allegra, and not only is that very difficult to remove thanks to its 4 hit points, it's just going to play into this Astra Militarum nastiness incredibly. Every unit that Paul ends up putting into play, he can sacrifice to Coteaz to augment his damage. The Seraphim, each and every time it can attack, it's going to be able to ready this Catachan Outpost, so it's just so incredibly nasty. We end up seeing a copy of Ammo Depot put into play in our Chaos player's headquarters. That's going to allow him to draw an additional card as soon as his hand drops to 3 cards or less, and that also eats up a deploy action quite nicely, so he'll be able to trigger this during his next available opportunity. I can only imagine he'll likely put out this copy of Zarathur's Flamers in order to get off an attack, then sacrifice it just to kill off some of these units, because each additional attacker, each additional unit to sacrifice Coteaz is going to be so potentially deadly, and it's just going to be so brutal because our Chaos player is gonna have to like either chew through Coteaz's 4 remaining hit points or chew through Seraphim Superior Allegra's remaining hit points. This copy of 2 arms is much more likely to be used as shields, seeing as how we've got the Seraphim sitting here. We do end up seeing a copy of Warp Storm drawn, and this is where things start to get very interesting, because as soon as our Chaos player ends up winning a single point of command, this could absolutely obliterate any number of weak, fragile little units like these Talarn Raiders here sitting at that planet. But all that we have to see is something along the lines of Paul managing to kill off these relatively weak units. Paul indicates that he has passed. Our Chaos Fanatics are going to be immune to that Warp Storm. The Khorne Berserker could end up being boosted to 4 attack and then attack, but if they manage to get killed, if they get dropped, if the staging ground puts a unit into play, unless Coteaz is removed from the planet, if those Khorne Berserkers, if they risk getting killed, then that battle is going to be, lost. So is Zarathur going to go to Iridial? Is he going to go to planet number 1 and risk being bloodied? I can't imagine we'll see him at planet number 1, so let's see. I can only assume Coteaz is going to go to planet number 1 and Zarathur will go to planet number 4, but let's see how everything breaks down. These orc cannons are going to be potentially pretty dangerous once we start to see some units whittled away. Both players turn up their command dials. We're going to see Zarathur go to planet number 3, just to, I guess, guarantee he gets those resources, and Paul is going to splash down at planet number 1, so Coteaz is not going to be affected by this Warp Storm, but in regard to command phase victories, it looks like we're going to see 2 for Zarathur, a grand total of 4 resources, 1 card for Zara, and then Paul is going to end up netting 1 card and 1 resource. He ends up getting a copy of the Formosan Black Ship, a little bit too late to actually be of any benefit to him, so the only event for Paul is going to be the 2 arms there. We end up seeing, like I mentioned, 1 card, 4 resources for Zarathur, and the only event, the only shield card is going to be this Warp Storm, and I can only imagine it is not going to be played as shields, so it's all going to come down to this. What exactly are we going to see? The initiative token is in the possession of Zarathur. battle is about to erupt at Taurus. Whichever player ends up taking Taurus is going to have a pivotal influence as to the outcome of this game, because either it's going to be Paul outright winning, or it's going to be our Chaos player getting one step closer to victory. But we do end up seeing that copy of Warp Storm, to no one's surprise, being put out to that planet. Paul does happen to have this copy of 2 arms. Looks like 2 damage to the Khorne Berserker, 2 damage to Seraphim Superior Allegra. And are we going to see the Elysian Assault Team die? Are we going to see the Talaran Raiders die? Note that Zarathur is going to have an opportunity to attack here with the Khorne Berserker. So Coteaz ends up taking 2 points of damage. I can only imagine that he's okay with being bloodied so long as he does manage to win this battle. And that Khorne Berserker is going to be able to get off one mighty swing, and it's likely going to be able to kill off Coteaz. So we end up seeing the Elysian Assault Team destroyed. And are we going to see that 2 arms protecting the Talaran Raiders, or is Paul going to allow it to die? It's definitely a little bit of a difficult choice here, but it's very close. But I really can't see any way for our Chaos player to eke out a victory here. We do end up seeing a copy of 2 arms used to spare that Talaran Raiders of being outright destroyed, so I can only imagine it is going to be the very first unit we will see attacking. It'll either be attacking for 2 base, or it'll be attacking for 0, augmented by the Catachan outpost. But it's going to be incredibly important that we see as many bodies on the table as possible. And of course, we can have Paul choose to detach this copy of the Glavoden Eagle as well, which seems like it'll be just, another crucial thing that Seraphim Superior Allegra can ready the Catachan outpost, and if at any point the outpost is ready, if the Eagle is sitting around, it's just as eligible as any other unit to be attacking for 3. So what are we going to see? Looks like our Chaos player indicates he has no additional actions. Are we going to end up seeing Paul put the Glavoden Eagle into play? I can only imagine that Coteaz is about to get his ass kicked right off the planet. So what are we going to see from Paul? What are we going to see from Zarathur? It looks as though we see the Talaran Raiders vanish, and we see the Catachan outpost augment Coteaz, and I can maybe only... Oh, my goodness, I've made a critical mistake, so I very much apologize. Of course, the initiative during combat happens to be in Paul Steiner's hand, so this initiative token deceived me. Of course, since Zarathur is not present at this planet, Coteaz is going to have the opportunity to attack first. So now I feel frightfully stupid, and of course this battle was not looking nearly as close as I surmised it would be, so my sincerest apologies for making that egregious mistake, but it seems as though Coteaz quite handily is able to attack for a grand total of 6 and just wipe that Khorne Berserker off the face of the planet. It only had 2 hit points remaining. There were no shield cards in hand for our Chaos player, but he would not have been able to kill it had he even been at... Anyway, point being, the Khorne Berserker was obliterated, so we see the Chaos Fanatics take a swing. Coteaz ends up taking 1 point of damage, and now Seraphim Superior Allegra is going to be able to take the final swing of the game. The Catachan outpost is able to ready, and that means that the copy of Chaos Fanatics is outright destroyed. Paul is actually going to be able to win the planet, and that is going to put him at a grand total of 3 red material icons, and therefore, congratulations to Paul Steiner, for he has won the game. So very well done by both of our players. An absolutely fantastic match. A very big thank you to Paul Steiner and ranlam for allowing me to record this game. Once again, I apologize for making that mistake at the very final planet of the game, but I'll just end this video by saying once again, thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already, or if you are already subscribed, as ever, you're encouraged to share this content, as the more viewers these videos eventually reach, all the more likely we are to serve to expand our Conquest community, and of course, altogether continue to send the message to Fantasy Flight Games to continue to support this excellent product. So, if at any point you feel like paying the equivalent of buying me a cup of coffee, maybe kicking me $1 or $2 a month to help me cover and recoup some of my file hosting and operating expenses, I'd be absolutely honored were you to visit my Patreon. So, once again, thank you so much for watching, and of course, as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.